For decades, Hollywood demanded its leading ladies be small, submissive, and safely shorter than their leading men. If you were a woman standing 6 feet tall, the silver screen didn't have room for you. You were simply a problem to be avoided. But these 7 legendary women refused to shrink, stood their ground, and changed cinema history forever. Hit that subscribe button, it's completely free. And it's a lot easier on your joints than getting up to find the remote. And unlike old Hollywood, we promise we'll never ask you to lie about your age or your height. Sigourney Weaver. The woman nobody wanted to hire. The name she was born with was Susan. Susan Alexandra Weaver. It was a name she wore through childhood, through her early adolescence, through the years when she grew to nearly 6 feet tall and felt, by her own description, like a giant spider. The name felt wrong, she later said, too short for what she would become. She found the name she wanted in an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, The Great Gatsby, lifted from a minor character and carried forward into a career that would prove considerably less minor. Changing the name was easy. Changing what the industry thought of a 6-foot woman was not. When Sigourney Weaver began auditioning in New York in the early 1970s, the response was consistent. She was too tall. The men she would have to stand beside were not tall enough. What director, she was told, wanted to spend his shooting days standing on an apple box just to look into her eyes? She heard this reasoning stated plainly, as though it were self-evident, as though the problem was obvious. And the obvious solution was her. She prayed, she has said, for unconventional directors, for someone whose vision of what a woman could be on screen was larger than what the industry had agreed to permit. For years, no one came. The name change was in part an act of accommodation to this waiting. She was Susan, a name that felt too small for the body and too apologetic for the ambition. Sigourney was longer, stranger, harder to dismiss. She took it from a novel and made it hers, and waited for the industry to catch up to what she already understood about herself. The waiting was long enough that it could have broken something. For some people it does. The careers that do not exist because the waiting outlasted the will are not documented anywhere. They simply stop. What came instead was Alien. In 1979, Ridley Scott was casting a science fiction film about a crew of working-class space freight workers who encounter something they cannot survive. The central role, the one who would survive, was Ellen Ripley. Weaver walked into that audition wearing high-heeled boots. She towered over Scott. He did not put her in a shorter pair of shoes. He cast her. Alien earned over $100 million on a budget of $11 million. Ripley became one of the defining characters of the genre. Weaver received an Academy Award nomination for the sequel. In 2003, the American Film Institute named Ripley the 8th greatest hero in American film history. None of that was supposed to be possible. The career that produced it, Weaver has said, could easily have not worked out at all. The directors who cast her did something the industry considered mildly irrational. They looked at a 6-foot woman and decided that was what they needed. She has never forgotten what it felt like when most of them didn't. Gina Davis, the lie she had to tell. She was the tallest girl in school. She was the tallest girl in most rooms she entered. Virginia Elizabeth Davis grew up in Wareham, Massachusetts, and she knew by early adolescence that her height was the thing people saw first. She was called Kareem Abdul-Jabbar by classmates after the basketball player. The nickname was not affectionate. She spent years learning to fold herself, to carry herself in ways that made her look smaller, to take up less vertical space in a world that seemed to require it. By the time she reached adulthood and began trying to work as a model, the industry confirmed what the nickname had implied. She was too tall. Standard clothing sizes were designed for bodies that did not extend to 6 feet. She told agencies she was 5'10", not because she believed it, but because it was the number that got her in the door. The modeling work came, then the acting work slowly. Tootsie in 1982, then Beetlejuice, then The Fly, then The Accidental Tourist, which won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1989. By then, she had stopped lying about her height. The career had arrived. The industry's early verdict, too tall, uncastable, a geometric inconvenience, had been demonstrably wrong. But the industry did not entirely abandon its position. When Jonathan Demme was casting The Silence of the Lambs in 1990, Geena Davis was one of the actresses considered for Clarice Starling. She did not get the role. The reason given was her height. The part went to Jodie Foster, who stands 5'3", what Clarice Starling would have looked like in the hands of a 6-foot actress, what that physical presence would have done to the scenes in the pit, in the basement, in the final dark hallway, is one of those questions that cannot be answered. What can be said is that Davis went on to make Thelma and Louise the following year, one of the most discussed American films of the decade, and that her physical presence in that film, the specific authority of her height, the way she occupies the frame beside Susan Sarandon, is inseparable from what the film became. The Clarice Starling loss carries a specific weight when you look at what Davis was doing in those years. Thelma and Louise came out in 1991, the same year The Silence of the Lambs opened. 2 films about women navigating a world that wants to contain them. Clarice moves through that world by being small, by being underestimated, by using the gap between what people see and what she actually is. Davis at 6 feet would have closed that gap entirely. The threat she represents would have been visible on the surface. It would have been a different film. Whether it would have been a lesser film is not a question that can be answered. What can be said is that the casting decision was made at least in part on the basis of a physical measurement, and that the measurement was not really about the character. It was about the men the character would stand beside. She founded the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media in 2004, after watching children's television with her daughter and noticing the ratio of male to female characters on screen. The research project she commissioned, one of the largest ever conducted on gender in children's entertainment, found nearly 3 male characters for every female one in hundreds of analyzed films. She had spent years being told she was too much. She spent the second half of her career documenting what happened when there wasn't enough. Nicole Kidman, measured at the door, she was told the simple version early: "You won't have a career. You're too tall." Nicole Kidman was a teenager in Australia when she began trying to work as an actress. The feedback arrived quickly and without subtlety. The industry had a height requirement and she exceeded it. At 5'11", she was taller than most of the men she would be expected to stand beside. And this was considered not her asset, but her problem. She was called Stork. She remembered it later with the specific precision of someone who has filed a thing away rather than forgotten it. At one open audition, the production was measuring candidates before allowing them into the room. Performers who exceeded the height limit were turned away. Kidman was stopped. She talked her way through the door anyway. She did not get the part. She did not even receive a callback, she has said. But she had gotten inside. She had sung 4 lines of a chorus. That was what she had. She began lying. Not dramatically, not in ways that would be discovered immediately. She told casting directors she was 5'10", 1'2". She was 5'11". The half-inch was her accommodation to an industry that would not accommodate her. What it cost her in those years, specifically which roles went to shorter actresses, which directors passed before she finished speaking, she has never enumerated. The accounting is incomplete because the rejections are not always explained. You simply stop hearing from people. A door closes before you understand it was open. What happened afterward is documented. She worked in Australia, then came to Hollywood. Days of Thunder in 1990, Batman Forever, Moulin Rouge. The Hours, for which she won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 2003. A career of exceptional range across more than 4 decades and over 100 credits. Enough that the early verdict, "You won't have a career, you're too tall," reads now as a statement about the limits of the people who made it, rather than the person it was directed at. She still gets sent shoes she cannot wear, high heels for red carpet events, every time as though the publicists have not checked the measurements. She asks for kitten heels. She is still taller than most of the people in the photograph. She has told her daughters that inner resilience is the superpower, that what matters is how you respond when someone tells you no, that a great sadness is wishing to be less than you are. She learned that from experience, from the years she spent pretending she was half an inch shorter than she was, and the years she spent deciding she wasn't going to do that anymore. Allison Janney, Too tall to be a leading lady. The rejections came in the same words on enough different days that she memorized them. You're too tall. Allison Janney trained at the neighborhood playhouse in New York in the early 1980s, in a class that recognized her from the first exercise. Her close friend Stephen Rogers, who would later write I, Tanya with her in mind, watched her perform for the first time and believed he was watching someone who would transform any room she entered. The faculty sent her to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London on a fellowship. She trained seriously, with a seriousness recognized by everyone around her. Then she went out for parts. The subway rides home from auditions were tearful, she has said. The feedback cycled back through the same few words. Too tall, not what casting directors had pictured. The leading lady occupied a specific physical space in the Hollywood imagination, and Janney's body, 6 feet of it, did not fit that space. What she was offered instead were the other parts. The friend, the colleague, the thankless roles her friend Rogers came to call, by her name, the thankless Allison Janney roles. She was given scenes she could make exceptional, and storylines that ended before they mattered. She worked continuously. She worked well. The work accumulated into a career that was, by most external measures, respectable. By her own, it was not yet what she was capable of. Aaron Sorkin gave her C.J. Craig. On The West Wing, which premiered in 1999, Janney played the White House press secretary, a character of complete authority, wicked intelligence and absolute physical command of every room she walked into. The character was not diminished by her height. The character required it. The specificity of her stride through those corridors, the precision of her at a podium, the way she occupied the frame when she delivered information that mattered. None of it worked without the body that delivered it. She won 4 Primetime Emmy Awards for the role. Then she won a 5th Emmy for Mom. Then she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for I, Tanya in 2018, the part Stephen Rogers had spent years waiting to write for her. The one that finally could not be played by anyone else. The parts written for Allison Janney had, for most of her career, been played by shorter women. That was the joke between her and Rogers. And the part written for Allison Janney finally was played by Allison Janney. And what that looked like, that specific combination of height and precision and earned authority, won every award the industry had available. There is a specific quality that Janney's height gives her on screen that does not reduce to any other element of performance. It is not just confidence, not just physicality, not just the way she enters a room. It is what happens when someone who has spent decades being told their body is wrong for this finally finds the work that was right for their body all along. The authority reads as earned because it was. The command of the frame reads as natural because it was hard-won. You cannot manufacture that combination. You can only arrive at it after long enough that it has become the only thing left. The thing they told her she was too tall for was a thing she eventually won everything doing. Gwendolyn Christie. What they said she was good for. Doctors offered her something when she was 14 years old. Her height had arrived early and without pause. By 14, Gwendolyn Christie had nearly reached her full adult height of 6.3, and the options before her had narrowed accordingly. She had grown up in a small village in the South Downs of England, and her body had placed her outside the range of most of what she might have wanted. Ballet was an early dream, one that her height foreclosed completely. The technique is built for specific proportions, and she exceeded them. School was its own difficulty. The bullying was sustained and specific. She was too tall to fit. The doctors had a pharmaceutical answer, growth inhibitors, a treatment that could slow or stop what her body was doing. She declined it. She has never fully explained the decision in terms that reduced to a single reason. It may simply have been that she understood, at 14, that what she was being asked to do was stop being herself, and that the people asking her had not thought carefully about what they were asking. She came to acting through the theater. She spent years building. When the casting for Game of Thrones was underway in 2011, George R.R. Martin's books described a character named Brienne of Tarth as unusually tall, physically imposing and misread by everyone she encountered. The producers looked at every tall actress available. Then they saw Christie. Martin later said they had looked at a dozen actresses reading for Brienne, and one actress who was Brienne. The distinction was decisive. Early in her career, before Game of Thrones, Christie had been told by people in the industry that her appearance, her height, her angular features, her body that did not fit the standard casting categories, would limit her to specific kinds of roles. Freaks, as she was told. Monsters. Brienne of Tarth was neither of those things. She was the most morally precise character in a story full of moral compromise. She made and kept promises in a world that treated promises as tactical positioning. She was not cast as the woman who fit the frame. She was cast as the character who carried the weight of the story's ethics on her back. And the physical authority required to make that visible on screen was exactly what had made her unemployable for years. She has spoken since then about what it meant to hear, for the first time, that someone wanted her because of what she was rather than despite it. The sentence has a before and after. Before, her body was a problem. After, her body was the reason. Game of Thrones ran for 8 seasons. Then Captain Phasma in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Then Netflix's Wednesday, in which her scenes with the 5'11" Jenna Ortega produced images so extreme in their vertical contrast that they became briefly iconic on their own. The industry's original assessment of what Gwendolyn Christie was good for has not aged well. Elizabeth Debicki, too tall for every room. She was born in Paris to dancer parents and moved to Melbourne when she was 5 years old. Ballet was the first aspiration. Her parents were dancers. The discipline of it, the vocabulary of the body, the way movement carried meaning, all of it made sense to her. She trained, then she grew, 6'2", 6'3". The form requires a specific relationship between the body and space, and hers had moved outside that relationship. She was too tall. A different path would have to be found. She considered law. The diversion was brief. Acting pulled more insistently. She enrolled in the Victorian College of the Arts, graduated, and began working with the Melbourne Theatre Company in early productions, small parts, stage work, the foundation building that precedes anything else. In 2009, she won a major Australian acting award. She was good, and people who saw her work said so. The problem was what she looked like in a casting room. At 6'3", Debicki arrives in any space and immediately reorganizes it. Directors who had never worked with an actress, her height found the geometry of her difficult to manage. Where to put her in the frame so she did not overwhelm it. How to shoot her beside actors who were, without exception, shorter. How to block scenes so the camera could accommodate what she was, without the whole scene becoming about that. The conventional filmmaking vocabulary had not been built for a woman her height. Directors who could not solve the problem simply chose not to engage with it. What changed her trajectory was Baz Luhrmann, who saw an audition reel and flew her to Los Angeles for a screen test for Jordan Baker in The Great Gatsby. She was 22 when the film was released in 2013. She stole every scene she was in. The combination of her height, her stillness, her quality of complete self-possession, none of it read as a problem. It read as the character. The Great Gatsby led to The Man from UNCLE, then to Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2, where her height was not a liability to be managed, but a requirement for the role. Then Christopher Nolan cast her in Tenet, not because he needed to accommodate her body, but because he needed what her body could do. Then came The Crown. 2 seasons as Diana Spencer, a role that required a specific physical correspondence, a lanky blonde elegance that Debicki carried without apparent effort. She won a Critics' Choice Award, an Emmy, a SAG Award, and a Golden Globe for the performance. Before The Great Gatsby, industry professionals struggled with what to do with her height. After it, they stopped trying to solve the problem and started recognizing it as the asset it had always been. It did not change what she is. It changed what they were willing to see. Uma Thurman, 35 years to walk without apology, she has described it plainly. It took her until she was approximately 35 years old to walk into a room without being self-conscious about her height. Uma Thurman grew up tall in an artistic family in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the daughter of a Buddhist scholar father and a model mother, and the height that would eventually define her screen presence was for most of her adolescence and early adulthood, a source of sustained private distress. She described her early self-perception with the bluntness of someone who has processed the thing fully. Hideous. She believed her looks were hideous. The height, the large feet, the ungainliness of a body that exceeded the available templates for what a young woman was supposed to be. All of it combined into something she carried as a burden for years longer than she should have had to. She modeled at 15, the cover of Vogue at that age. The modeling industry found her useful in ways that fashion allows. Tall is useful in fashion, where the clothes require a certain vertical architecture to present correctly. But the other industry, the one she cared about more, was more equivocal. Hollywood had a leading man problem. The men who played romantic leads were not in the majority 6 feet tall. An actress who approached that height complicated the shot, the blocking, the dynamics the camera was expected to record. The romantic lead was supposed to be smaller. The love interest was supposed to fit. Thurman did not fit. She took the parts available to her and made them count. Dangerous Liaisons in 1988 at 18, opposite John Malkovich. She was already doing what the industry had spent years telling tall women they could not do. Existing inside a romantic drama with full authority. Making the camera come to her rather than the other way around. Then came Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino has said he wrote Mia Wallace in Pulp Fiction with Thurman in mind, or at least with her image available as a reference point for what the character required. The character needed someone whose presence was complete in itself, someone the camera could not look away from. Not because she was classically beautiful, in the conventional marketing department sense, but because she occupied the frame with total occupation. No apology, no accommodation, just the full fact of herself. Pulp Fiction came out in 1994. Thurman received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She was 24. Tarantino then built Kill Bill. Both volumes around her. A woman who is physically capable, physically imposing, physically real in a way the action genre had not consistently produced in its female leads. Her height is a big part of why the fight sequences in that film carry weight. A smaller actress in a padded suit performing the same choreography produces a different emotional reality. Thurman's size, the specific proportion of her in the frame against the men and women she is fighting, and is what makes the threat credible. She said she did not walk without self-consciousness until she was 35. She made Pulp Fiction at 24. The confidence, visible in that film. The ease of her in that diner, that apartment, that scene on the dance floor, was performed before she had fully arrived at it herself. That is one measure of what the industry asked of tall women. Not just that they find their way in despite the obstacles, but that they project a certainty they had not yet been permitted to feel.